Man City and the Premier League have walked away. They've terminated legal discussions surrounding APT, associated party transactions. And Man City now have got a big gateway into getting in a massive set of sponsorship deals, while the Premier League could actually benefit in a big way as well. We're going to break down in this video what's come out today. And of course, does this allude to anything surrounding 115? It's a very different legal situation, but could we actually get something from this? How it's happened, how both parties have collaborated, how it's kind of, I dare say, been won by Manchester City. Leave your comments down below. We're going to try and break it down like a layman that I am to anything legal surrounding football, but it is something, unfortunately, I've had to clue myself up on, because even APT, which is a very small legal kind of discussion compared to how grandiose and how seismic 115 could be. And by the way, we don't even know when that's coming out, by the way. That's absolutely crazy. But you do have to say an overview of the situation is that the Premier League obviously put together a set of, I'd argue, arbitrary, anti-competitive guidelines towards how much money a club can receive from sponsors and companies that are connected to the football club. I'd argue they're arbitrary because on the top line, the idea of fair market value, I think that's very important. We don't want some guy, some rogue owner coming in, buying, let's say, Wrexham and putting £100 billion into the football club, which would just completely be outrageous, and it wouldn't feel like it would be sensible. It wouldn't be almost linear. It might kind of shoot the club up and down. It'd be too volatile for English football. But there was that kind of concern. I know it's a strange example to start the video with, but this is surrounding the PIF and when they bought Newcastle United. There was fear from the Premier League, and I'm sure from all the owners of the football clubs in the Premier League, that the PIF would come in, they'd sell maybe a Saudi Arabian company parts of that with Newcastle United for an extraordinary sum, allowing Newcastle United to sign the likes of, you know, Neymar, Kylian Mbappe. These are the kind of names that were linked to Newcastle United out of nowhere. Now, I know it's ironic me saying this as a Manchester City fan. Of course it is. Man City got taken over by Sheikh Mansour within 30 seconds. Robinho was coming in for £30 million, which was a British record transfer at the time. So you could say to me, why have Man City got any right within the first 12 months of a brand new takeover? Bear in mind that the club hadn't won a league title in decades. Why did Man City have any right to come in and have a £400 million Etihad Airways deal straight away? You could argue that in a big way. But ultimately, now that's come to fruition. Now that a Champions League has been won, multiple league titles, incredible success on the pitch, a women's team, an unbelievable stadium, multiple stadiums, multiple training campuses. So after 13 years of continued success, being the most successful side in English football history, having an unbelievable amount of merit on the footballing level, whether you like the investment or not, it's investment that is parallel and similar to Manchester United, to Arsenal, to Liverpool, to Barcelona, to PSG. We can debate the money in football until the cows come home, whether we like it or not, whether Man City deserved the investment or not. But ultimately, Man City had the investment, I'd argue executed that investment to the highest level. And then associated party transactions, the ruling came in 2023, and I'd argue it actually was quite uncompetitive. You're basically making arbitrary rules. And by the way, are the Premier League objective in this situation? We don't entirely know, and that was a big part of the legal framework for Man City in 2023 and even last year in a tribunal in 2024. Are these rules objective? What is fair market value? And why would Man City be limited in terms of the ambition of the football club and made uncompetitive in a kind of free market economy? These are basic arguments that kind of Man City made. But it's interesting. This is what the statement kind of reads. The Premier League and Man City have reached a settlement in relation to the arbitration commenced by the club earlier this year concerning the Premier League's associated party transaction rules. And as a result, the parties have agreed to terminate the proceedings. This is an interesting thing, because ultimately it means the Premier League have won a massive part of this, and Man City. This isn't necessarily Man City winning this 100%, but the Premier League can definitely walk away and say they've won a large part of it, because the legal framework that they're trying to build around what we deem as fair market, what we deem as what is fair for an associated party to transact with a football club, the Premier League can uphold that legal framework without having to kind of revolutionise it, and that's because Man City have agreed to walk away as well. That has to be noted. This settlement brings an end to the dispute between the parties regarding APT rules. As part of the settlement, Manchester City accepts that the current APT rules are valid and binding. Now, obviously, this is a massive win for Man City as well, because it allows Man City to potentially get a huge rumoured Etihad Airways deal come in for £1 billion. That could be £120 million a year. If you add that into the Puma deal, that's the biggest kit deal in the history of Premier League football, for another $1 billion as well. We're talking Man City could have kind of genuine business revenues coming in of 240 from those two deals alone, million a year, which obviously would make Manchester City very, very competitive in the transfer market as well. And you have to say that the Premier League rules that were changed, I think Man City argued quite hastily last season in terms of shareholder loans, is now quite interesting as well, because that actually is a strong point for the Premier League. The Premier League now will have to assess if shareholder loans are fair market value, because when Man City were first in this kind of legal dispute with the Premier League weren't even looking at loans that Premier League owners were given to their own clubs. So a Premier League owner could theoretically give £100 million loan at 0% interest, which is obviously massively competitive, because not many people can do that. You can't even do that for a 50 quid Wonga loan, let alone £100 million theoretically. So the Premier League now walk away with amended rules where shareholder loans are now also assessed as well, which you could argue protects football clubs from this kind of volatile, kind of hyper investment that I was talking about at the start of the video. So the Premier League walk away with some sort of win as well. You have to say that. So in short, the Premier League ultimately walk away with a legal framework which they can now uphold, which does have an element of protection for Premier League clubs not getting completely hyper invested and kind of this volatile nature of money in football. There is an element of protection now. The Premier League can now scrutinise loans and, of course, any kind of associated party transactions coming into the football club. I think that is a very healthy thing for the Premier League. And then you can say that the bigger clubs, and of course include Manchester City in that now, don't get hindered, because ultimately these rules, if they were fully enforced, would protect clubs that don't have bigger aspirations, don't have the luck of having owners that want to put even more money into the football club, which I would argue isn't a bad thing. It is a bad thing if it's reckless, if it's volatile, if it's boom and bust. And I think the Premier League now uphold enough of the legal framework to suggest that they can protect football clubs with fair market value, and the idea of loans not being stupid, coming into the football club, being fair market value, not being bullying of any other Premier League club. There's an element of a fair level for all Premier League football clubs. And you have to say about 115, there will be, from my perspective, the comment that the Premier League and Manchester City walking away, it looks in amicable terms. Now, this isn't two sets of teams walking away and shaking hands after one side lose 4-0. I'm not saying that. This is a legal framework, and we have no real legal indication about what this alludes to in terms of 115. Of course not. But you have to say, as an overview, as a football fan, watching from afar, watching these tribunals, watching football clubs having to defend ourselves, I'd say as a Manchester City fan, in a way that seems excessive, I would argue, and dare I say it, some of these points are arbitrary. You have to say, can the Premier League and Man City work together? Can the Premier League and Man City be amicable? Can there be this idea that maybe the 115 situation could end in a vaguely positive framework for both parties? Could it allude to the idea that Manchester City win them outright because the Premier League have walked away from these after only a couple of years and don't have any kind of anti-competition thing thrown at them? That would be a very interesting perspective. I hopefully have broken down what is a very interesting day in the Premier League between Manchester City and the Premier League and APT rules. Hopefully, as football fans, we see less of these kind of rulings and more about football. And maybe the Premier League can actually scrutinise on a legal basis why the PGMOL is trying to ruin the game in this country. Maybe these are bigger decisions to talk about. Who knows?